Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 here on the 1043 podcast. Today we're going to talk about use of force. We kind of covered it in our last podcast. Um, what do we mean by use of force? It measures the most officers are trained in. And you see this on News Channel where there's an officer involved incident, especially here lately with the ICE raids. And those that impede an arrest with rioting and or when an officer is on a scene trying to make an arrest.
Well, use of force, when you're taught as an officer, you're taught as a ladder. But in everyday world, force is used. When you get in a disagreement with somebody and you raise your voice, you're escalating a measure of force to make a point. Now you're not going to hurt anybody, nobody's being threatened. And when you make a threat, that escalates force. It's the use of something to get somebody to do what you want them to do.
So compliance.
Pretty much. So if you and I are arguing over the checkbook and you think we need to pay for the, Lifetime Movie Network channel because yay, girl power, uh, and I say no, the Military History Channel is a much better use of our funds. Um, as we raise voices or the voices become harsher, that use of force is going up a little bit to try to get the other one to do what we want them to do, right?
Right.
I am obviously right with the History Channel. You're obviously wrong with the Lifetime Network.
You rarely ever win arguments.
I know. I'm a typical married guy.
So, like we covered in our last podcast, all law enforcement officers, it doesn't matter who they work for, what agency, their training doesn't end once they graduate. They were required to do continuous training. Is in the continuous training, do they go back over force in some of those required classes?
It kind of depends. They'll tell you where it falls in the use of force ladder, and we'll get into what the use of force ladder is a little bit later. Um, how to kind of judge, but when you decide to use force, it's very circumstantial and it's very on the spot. Rarely does anybody ever get to say, I'm going to walk into this situation and I'm going to use this amount of force. It's the amount of resistance you're getting that dictates how much force you're going to use. So law enforcement talks about a ladder because you can go up and down, and there's a new concept where it's a paradigm, and I'm not real familiar with it. But to answer your question, they'll kind of, if you sit in that training, they'll say this is where it is on the continuum or on the ladder, depending on the phrasing they're using. Um, but you're generally not going over the basics of the ladder again.
Right. That's in your first academy. That's in academy training.
Yeah, you spend a good amount of time in your basic school talking about what is use of force, the legality behind it, when you can move, what dictates being able to move up or down. Moving down the use of force in modern parlance is de-escalation. Everything's about de-escalation.
Right. But those decisions to use of force, whatever step you are on the ladder, that's done in a split second, depending on your suspect.
Yeah, and oftentimes the officer's not dictating where you're at. They're walking into a situation, and the person and the circumstance of that situation dictates that use of force. So, an officer being dispatched to say possible burglary in progress of a bank at 1 in the morning, right? When they show up, they're probably going to go ahead and unholster their weapon as they go in, especially if they find like an unlocked door, they're going to go in and clear the building. Now, it is just as likely that unlocked door is because some bank manager forgot to lock the door, or they locked it and it didn't latch properly, right? Completely reasonable. We've all been in situations like that. We've done it with our home, right? And that may be the better example. So that officer unholsters his weapon. He has upped that use of force or potential use of force given just the circumstance. That's without anybody around. And one of the things that gets left out is if you were forced to go into, say, that building and check and see, and you don't know, was that building broken into, right? Is there somebody in that building? What would you do differently? I mean, we love to criticize officers and their use of force, and you've heard me say it before and time again, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. No use of force ever looks good on video. It's only good for news to sell commercials. That's
Yeah, because they only show the first or the last 30 seconds of the incident. They don't show what happened that led up to that incident and why use of force.
Well, and a great example of that would be Rodney King because it's a 28-minute video
Right.
and the news showed the last 30 seconds and they never talked about how officers were trained. They never talk about why the officers were acquitted in their first trial that caused the riots. And how they got acquitted. And it was all based on the use of force continuum, right? So the media, quick, I need to get your attention to sell a commercial, racist, racist, racist. But that's not, you can't claim racism as a criminal defense. They defended themselves based on use of force and how they were taught in the continuum. The Minneapolis show van, right? Rodney King again, that came down to, was that officer trained to use of force? And if you've never seen The Fall of Minneapolis, where they talk about where they talk about uh uh if you've never seen the Fall of Minneapolis, where they talk about the use of force in what Chauvin did to Rodney King, um they very much show the court and the chief and the lead training officer uh showing, hey, they were never trained in using those holds. They were never trained to do that. And Chauvin was never allowed to enter evidence to show he had the training manuals showing he was trained to use a specific hold and a specific type of use of force. And it never gets talked about because it doesn't sell commercials. It's boring if you're sitting here getting into the act weeds of it, but it absolutely, if we're going to talk about what we want officers to do and their day-to-day activities, we have to talk about their use of force.
That's something politicians always leave out when they're doing their press conferences is how that officer was trained. Because
Oh,
again, it doesn't sell commercials and it doesn't follow their base.
you mean the same politicians that want to make names off of, oh my God, that cop was racist, and the DA's, oh my God, I'm going to indict him. Yeah, they're all guarded by cops, and you'll have to go through metal detectors to get in the same room with these people, and you have to go through locked doors to get to these people, and that's all of those buildings are guarded by cops. But the cop on the street, oh my God, he's racist and doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah. If it came down to that cop that's assigned to that politician and they had to use of force to save that politician's life, he's a hero.
Oh, absolutely.
Again, it goes to the cop on the street that's saving lives because he has to worry about everybody around him when when a situation escalates. They don't talk about that. But again, if they're saving the politician from being hurt, they're heroes.
Yeah, when they guard the buildings they work in.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the good
I mean, look at the
cops.
Capitol Police.
And I'm not downing the officers that work as bailiffs or are uh,
security
for politicians at all.
politicians.
They are cops.
It's an assignment.
They are our brothers. Absolutely. What I'm talking about is the cop on the street gets questioned and gets called everything but a child of God, for, and somehow we can magically see into their mind, and they're racist and they're sexist, and insert phobia or ism here, whatever the catchphrase of the day is. But the ones that don't have to do that every day, they don't use that force every single day, um they're fine. They're not touchable. we should probably talk about the latter and what we talk about when we talk about use of force. Um, so what you're trained in the basic school, the whatever your basic police officer academy, and we talked about training in the last episode and how everybody has to go through that. Um, the first thing is officer presence. There's a reason why they wear uniforms. Um, and there's a reason why they drive marked units. Um, it's so you know they're there. It's meant to show an air of stability, an air of authority. And I love these goobers who, well, cops are just yeah, they're angry and they're authoritarian and they're jackbooted thugs. Yeah, we put them in uniform, genius, for a reason. Because if a cop gets called to your scene, they're not getting called to say happy birthday. They're getting called because your life has deteriorated to the point that you need a total stranger empowered by the state to come sort out your poor life choices.
Yeah.
So an officer wears a uniform, right? And even the voice he uses and sounding very sharp in the way he talks, uh, it's meant to establish control of a situation. Again, he's there because you can't control your own life, right? Something has happened. Somebody has created a situation in which you called 911. And to be clear, that's what they're there for, right? They are there to go help people take care of situations. That is what we want them to do. They are doing what we pay them to do, right? When they come in, whether that's that burglary situation I talked about earlier, whether it's a family violence situation, domestic violence, whichever phrase you use, um, whatever the situation, a bad car wreck, and they're out there helping fire take care of it, right? They're there to help make that situation better. The voice and the uniform is so everybody can instantly see that they're doing that. The next thing is what they call hands on or open hands. And I'm sure my brethren who teach, the 4 year SWAT bro who teaches defensive tactics at your academy is going to tell me, no, 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 that's the wrong phrase now. It's outdated. Or no, brah, that's the wrong phrase. We don't use that anymore. Sorry, got you wrong. Didn't mean to make fun of you. But when the officer goes to basically grab you and hey, put your hands behind your back, they're actually touching you. They have escalated to that next level. Now, if you're compliant and you're putting your hands behind your back, he's still going to touch you, right? He still has to take your hand. He has to manipulate it in a way to put the handcuffs on, right? And put your hands in position. That is hands on. If you pull away, if you take a swing at that officer, and that officer can handle you, right? We're not talking about the 5'2", 130-pound female, and she's trying to arrest the 5'11", 230 pounds. Her use of open hands is going to probably be a little more than two people of comparable size, right? And she has to. Um, but it's still open hands. You're still touching somebody. You still have escalated that force. The next level is your what they call less lethal. They don't say non-lethal. They say less lethal, and that's because of stupid lawyer word games. But those are your chemical agents, right? That's your tear gas. That's your taser. That's your baton. You're going to hurt somebody with that stuff. And by the way, that stuff's meant to hurt because if you're fighting somebody and you use one of those tools and they start thinking about, oh my God, this pepper spray hurts my eyes, I can't see. Well, you're not thinking about assaulting the officer, and the officer can use those few seconds to gain control of that situation, right? So you'll see that stuff being used. And the next is deadly force and the threat of deadly force. That's your firearm. Period. If you use that weapon, whether rifle, shotgun, again the SWAT bros will be going, duh. bruh, we don't use shotguns anymore. Like, oh my God, that is so antiquated. Um, but they still love their rifles. They clean their rifles. They talk to their. Sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent. They love their rifles. But even just the pistol, which is the most commonly used weapon in an officer involved shooting, right? We have all this training and all these other tools as far as firearms. The most commonly used weapon is the officer's pistol because that's what's on his hip and it's what's readily available. And it's used to deadly force. And something that I think gets lost with that is we come back to that 5'3", 130-pound female, 6 foot, 230-pound male. Do you really think his hands against somebody like that is not deadly force? Right? That 50-year-old officer who's got the dad bod, he may be in some shape, but he's not 22, right? He's not in his peak physical condition when that 52-year-old goes to try to arrest that 22-year-old. Do you really think that 22-year-old can't hurt and like serious bodily injury, possibly kill, and not use a firearm?
Right.
Absolutely can. So you'll see that use of force. You'll see that officer escalate the use of force higher than what the little video may show for a lot of circumstantial reasons.
Right. And that was going to be my next point is because you seriously can't, because you can seriously hurt or kill someone, like you said, without a weapon. That doesn't mean the officer can't go to deadly force, even if that individual doesn't have a weapon. Because, like you said, a 50-something-year-old officer versus a 22-year-old suspect can do bodily damage or
Yeah.
seriously kill an officer on that scene. It may be that he's all jacked up. It may that he be have mental issues that the officer doesn't know about. I mean, anything can escalate a situation to where that officer is going to get bodily injury or death.
First recorded murder in history was one brother used a rock to kill another brother.
Right.
So if you can use that rock and incapacitate that officer who brought the gun to the situation because they carry it on their hip all the time, right?
Right.
Well, now what happens when that person takes their weapon, right? What happens when that guy, in the heat of the moment, and I get every mama out there is going to say when that officer ends up shooting them, he was a good boy and he was a straight A student and he was going to cure cancer and oh my God, don't mind the 25 previous felonies he had. He was a good person and that officer shouldn't have shot him.
He was going to change the world.
Yeah, no. He was going to incapacitate that officer and in the heat of the moment, that person now gets that officer's gun. You have to worry what happens when he gets that gun.
Well, that's like the peaceful protests, and I'm using air quotes on that, that's happening right now. You see these individuals that are throwing frozen water bottles, and I'm sorry, that can cause damage. They were throwing things in the very beginning that could seriously hurt those officers or kill them. And it wasn't that they had weapons.
A frozen water.
Let me rephrase that. Weapons of a gun. They had weapons that were frozen water bottles and signs and stuff that bricks. I mean, come on, people. Like we just talked about, the first recorded history of a death without a gun were two brothers who killed one with a rock. Yeah. So it's the same concept.
And my granny would be really disappointed that I honestly can't remember the brothers' names at this point. But it's Old Testament. See, you can't remember it either. Sunday school, totally wasted on the two of us.
I know. It's called old age. It's
well, but that water bottle. I mean, would you stand there and let somebody take a frozen water bottle and throw it at you? I mean, not even throw it at your head. Just let it hit your chest. Do you really think that's not going to hurt? That's not going to do damage? And now imagine an entire crowd. Imagine standing in front of 40 people and just two of them are throwing frozen water bottles at you. How are you going to react? What are you, as that officer, what do you expect them to do?
Yeah. By the way, it was Cain and Abel.
I knew that.
I had to Google it. I'm ashamed of myself.
Like I said, Granny's
Yeah.
Sunday school teachings were completely
Just
wasted on me.
right out the window.
So when we talk about use of force, another thing we need to talk about is it's very circumstantial. It's in that second. If you've ever actually been in a fight, um, whether it's just a bar room, you and your buddy have had too many beers and too many words between you, a fist fight, or you've been like in the military and you've been in a real gunfight. You're in the middle of it. There's no de-escalation. There's no way to bring it down. You don't have a whole lot of control over the situation because the other party participating in that fight, yeah, they get a vote in how that goes, right? So if they're sitting there just wailing on you and screaming in your face and touching you or throwing hard objects at you, whether that's rocks, frozen bottles, whatever happens to be handy, setting fireworks off. Imagine standing in that riot line and somebody setting fireworks off right above your head. Are you going to tell me that's not force being used? Are you going to let your neighbor do that to you? No, absolutely not. You're going to call the very cops you've been talking shit about to come stop them and arrest them.
Your first call is 911.
Right. But now all of a sudden when we do it to police officers, no, they're there to take it.
Yeah, they're just exercising their right to protest.
To free speech. It's democracy.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You're assaulting people.
Yeah. There's physical assault and there's verbal assault. And these protesters, they're doing both. So imagine how heightened that situation is for those line officers that are standing there at that riot. And I can't, for the life of me, call it a peaceful protest when you're doing that to the officers that are trying to do their jobs. It's not a peaceful protest. Again, air quotes. It at that point is a riot. So you don't have a right to riot. You have a right to protest peacefully because they're verbally and physically assaulting these officers.
Yeah. And that's what we're seeing on TV, right? So that's what's making the news and that's what everybody's looking at. But officers get assaulted all day, every day, right? Because almost half of every call that your patrol officer goes to is going to be domestic in nature, right? So they're walking into somebody's home and you got called there because one person is claiming the other person assaulted them, is hitting them, whatever the situation may be. You're called in your uniform and, the way you talk may or may not de-escalate that, right? So what happens when you walk into that house? Imagine walking into a house and the reality is you don't have backup right away. Your backup may be 2 minutes out. Your backup may be 15 minutes out. Imagine walking into a house of people who are all related. They all live together, right? And you kind of separate them. Maybe they cooperate a little bit with that. They're screaming. And it doesn't matter who you talk to in that house. When they tell you their version, they are completely innocent angel and that other person's the devil incarnate. And you're going to have everybody basically tell that version of events, right? So you're trying to kind of piece together this stuff. And maybe you start kind of looking around the different stories, you realize you're going to arrest, and it's typically the male. So I'll use the male as the example here, but that's not always the case. It's just males tend to be more aggressive. But you go to arrest the guy. Now all of a sudden he's fighting. She all of a sudden is upset because, oh shit, you're touching my husband. She was probably the one that freaking called you. But now all of a sudden you've got, at a minimum, he's resisting, even if that's just kind of pulling away and not letting you put the handcuffs on. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. God forbid his mama's in the house too, because she's going to be losing her shit. And the kids are screaming and crying, "Stop touching my daddy!" And
Don't take him to jail.
that is the reality most patrol officers face almost every single day that they go to work. Nobody talks about it and nobody wants to deal with it. But that's the use of force officers have to deal with every single day.
Plus, you don't know when you go in that situation if there's weapons or not.
Right. And again, kind of like where we talked about the ice bottle. You go to hit me with a broomstick.
It's a weapon.
It's a weapon at that point, right?
Right.
Everybody talks about guns and maybe knives. No. Anything hard that can be used, hit against the head, is a weapon. Period. Anything can be used as a weapon.
Right.
You stab me with a pen.
It's a weapon.
It is.
So these libtards and these libtard politicians keep spewing these same things over and over again, saying, well, they're peaceful. Well, you become unpeaceful when you're throwing things and when you're yelling and screaming at these officers. And like we talked about yesterday on the last podcast, the whistles.
Yeah. So
that's a form of assault because you were throwing that officer off of what he's supposed to do. It's a noise.
It's meant to rattle the officer. What they're trying to do is to create a situation because, and I brought the point up last time. You listen to a news or podcast, and you listen to just a few seconds.
Oh, that's going off.
Yeah, you're ready to change channel. Now imagine standing out there for hours on end, having to listen to that, and then you're having to make that decision. But that comes back to the family violence case too, right? Everybody's yelling and screaming, and the second you go to arrest somebody, now everybody has turned against you in that house. Excuse me, in that single wide mobile home, right? Because they're all drunk,
right?
And they're all screaming at you. And now imagine you're trying to make a reasoned, rational, legal decision with all of this noise coming at you.
So when 911 dispatchers tell y'all, okay, you're going to this address, and they give you the code for the domestic disturbance, that's all the information you're going on.
Well, you get the information the person who called chose to give.
Right.
Right? So remember what I said. If you interview everybody at that second in that building, they're all telling you a version of events in which they are the innocent victim, hero, angel, and the other person is wrong for even drawing air today. Right?
They're just batshit crazy.
So, whichever person decides to call 911, they're giving
their version
of that.
Right.
So, the 911 dispatchers who have a really tough job.
Yeah.
They're trained to kind of ask questions. They're trained to, hey, keep on the phone, keep listening to what's going on because they're recording all that, and they're recording what's being said in case the investigator needs it later. But they're only relaying what they've been told. So a typical patrol officer may get dispatched to 1313 Mockingbird Lane, family violence in progress, male, has struck the caller. And they'll call them the caller. They won't necessarily.
And by the way, if you know what 1313 Mockingbird Lane is, you are our people.
Go Gen X and the Munsters.
Okay, we talked about like watching cop shows, and that automatically makes people, cop experts. What is a first telltale sign when you get to a domestic call? Is it the Busch beer cans and the wife beater with the guy standing in the door of the double wide going, I ain't do nothing?
years ago.
That's just a southern
And
thing.
and yeah, and understand you can replace. She called out the beer brand, but you honestly can replace it with anyone. The old officers used to have a correlation walking up to the house of how bad the family violence was going to be
Spit it on
by the
beer
empty
cans.
cases of beer case cardboard boxes and beer cans strewn about the yard. So if you showed up and you saw them, you knew that couple had been drinking all day, right? This is going to be bad. Somebody has been hurt.
Oh.
You're probably going to have to fight somebody. They ain't going to jail. And typically, what happens is the male will start screaming, "You can't be here. Go away. It's fine. It's fine." Right? And that's why officers will come in and they'll immediately separate
Separate.
and try to get, if they're doing what they're supposed to, they're going to try to get them everybody out of sight and sound to get a version of what's going on.
So I want to switch the narrative a little bit. We're still talking about training and use, or well, not training, but use of force. So you hear these libtards come out and go, they need more training, and we've talked about that. And they need training on use of force, and they need policy rewritten on use of force. So my question to y'all is, what training do you think these officers should have in use of force? Because they go through the academy and they get the ladder system. It's hands on, right? And it's also classroom. Yeah. They go through the legality of use of force. So to the listeners with a brain, what training do you think these officers should have in use of force, and or do you think these agencies need to redo the policy? Because you're talking about putting officer safety on hold because they're having to deal with these things that we've talked about.
Well, you can't policy every scenario,
right?
Right? So we jumped back and forth between how use of force is used on a riot control and how it's used on domestic violence, right? Now, the ladder and the tools are the same, but those are completely different scenarios, right? So you can't, and let's say, okay, we're going to write exactly how you're going to use the force on those. You can't account for who the players are. You can't account for all the people. You can't account for a otherwise reasonable person is just a mean ass drunk and gets all fired up and wants to fight you. You can't account how neither one of those two apply to walking into a bar or working a concert venue, or you just make a routine traffic stop on your way home and it turns out the driver has a warrant from somewhere, right? And it doesn't even have to be like a serious, everyone thinks murder and rape. A lot of warrants are failed to appear. They didn't show up for a court date. They didn't, or drug possession or whatever. It could be what we would call minor or quality of life stuff, but they didn't go to court. It could be something simple as that. You can't write a policy to cover every scenario. And in each one of those general categories, the situation changes depending on where you're at, the environment, the people you're dealing with, how familiar you are, because your 3-time felon knows that cop procedures, right? He knows what the cops are going to do and why they're going to do it. These rioters are training and being taught and are actively attempting to provoke an officer, and that comes back to the point I was trying to make about the sound. They're trying to rattle that officer long enough to make him make a mistake so that they can film it, right? So you can't write a use of force. You know, the most brilliant, never been cop, CJ, criminal justice academic cannot write a use of force policy that encompasses everything it goes into that moment, because it is very situational. It's very circumstantial.
Well, then I guess my question is, they have the training, so what did these libtard politicians and libtard lefties, what is their concept and their thinking of, well, they need to be trained in use of force for this situation, not knowing there's 50 other different situations these officers could get into on any given shift. Because, like you said, use of force is modeled for situations that are similar. Policy's not, because you can't go writing 50 policies on each
You
situation.
couldn't write a book thick enough to cover every
Right.
circumstance.
So these people are calling for more training on use of force or lack of, where they don't want use of force to be a part of that situation. So what are the cops supposed to do? Stand there and take it?
Well, first off, the people that are screaming that have probably never been in any sort of fight in their life beyond, being mad, some Karen being mad because another one didn't compliment the color of dress correctly, right? So you got people trying to make use of force that have never been in a fight.
Right.
You got academics writing model use of force policies and publishing peer reviewed articles when they've spent their entire freaking lives working in institutions because they've never left the freaking schoolyard, working in institutions guarded by cops.
Right.
Right? You got politicians that, their number one goal is to collect enough donations for their next election.
Yeah.
Right? So anything that gets them elected, anything that gets that peer reviewed paper gets attention to it, right? And understand there's a certain quality of the more controversial, the more eyes that get on it, the more that works in that academic's favor. You got every one of those people who are basically creating the narrative that your common libtard is parroting. That, oh my God, they should do this. These people have never been in a fight, right? Military and police and fire are a small percentage of our population, and it's the very percentage that goes and deals with situations that the rest of us don't want or can't deal with. And then we want to yell at the cops because they have to use force, because they have to do these different things.
Yeah. Another thing that's been brought up in the last several years, and most departments, especially blue states, are starting to adopt this, is taking social workers with them to a scene to de-escalate a situation.
In paper, it sounds really good, right? And I can think of one scenario in which that applies. Family has a member who's got some sort of mental health problem, right? It's escalated to the point it's starting to interfere with everybody's life, right? So they petition a judge and get what's called an emergency uh, detention order, right? And it may have a different name in different states, but essentially it's a warrant issued by a judge to take a person and take them to a mental health facility for evaluation. So a family member can petition for that. Maybe a medical professional can petition for that. A police officer, right? If he's gone out to a bunch of public intoxication and domestic violence and he realizes maybe there's some underlying mental health issues going on there, he can go petition the judge for and it's basically you write an affidavit, the judge reads it and decides whether. So you take that mental health officer, you partner with a social worker, they go out to execute that, and the whole point is the social worker is actually going to take lead on that because they're in plain clothes. They're probably going to talk a little softer. Their approach is going to be a little easier. The officer is there more to take custody of the person. And if the person escalates, if they start trying to assault that social worker or whatever, to basically protect them, right? To make sure that that detention is enforced and the subject ends up at the mental health evaluation where the judge said they were supposed to go, right? So if you got a few officers in your department And that's what they do. That's a good thing. It falls within the social order framework of law enforcement agencies, which is a relatively new phenomenon, but that's kind of where that falls. Um, the libtard screaming every cop should have a partner social worker is not practical and doesn't fit the vast majority of situations. That social worker becomes a liability if you walk into that alcohol induced family violence, right?
Right.
Again, that's what cops spend a lot of their time dealing with is family violence situations, domestic violence situations. That social worker is a liability because now that officer's trying to talk to everybody, find out what's going on. They've got that social work. They've got to protect that person. Um, and a lot of times you'll see subjects all of a sudden start trying to appeal the social worker in order to keep their ass from getting arrested. So they really become a liability more than anything. They have a purpose within a given set of circumstances, but for the most part, the vast majority of law enforcement, they're it's feel good dressing that the politicians are willing to spend public taxpayer money on so that they can say they did something.
Well, that's like Zoran Mondami when he was running for mayor of New York, how he said he was going to replace most of the police force with social workers. Okay, so you're going to replace them with civilians that have no training. They don't know how to de escalate a situation if a suspect becomes combative. They're by themselves. I just don't see it working.
Well, remember what I said. The subject gets a vote, right?
Right,
They can decide to comply, right? Hey, maybe that cop was wrong arresting you. That's what the court's for,
right.
right?
It's for a judge to decide.
Right. And impartial, away from all the circumstance. That's why we pay judges, right? Um, to turn around and say that somehow somebody with a social work degree can handle it better than cops. Well, modern policing's been around since the 1830s, and we've argued over roles cops should have, and what they should and shouldn't be able to do, and different. The U.S. has its rules, and other countries have their rules on what they can and can't do. I'm willing to think there's been a lot of really smart people over the last few decades who've thought about this situation. If a social worker really was the answer and not just some political bite to, hey, vote for me because, it would have been done already, right?
Right.
This is not some magical new idea that we just all of a sudden came upon. Social work has been around for over 100 years. Cops have been in uniformed police in the form that we kind of think of today as being uniformed police have been around since 1830s. So yeah, that's bullshit. That's somebody that has no sense of history. They have no sense of what cops actually deal with every day. They have no sense of just how bad people in society really is. And that sounds very cynical, but if you lock your doors every time you go to a parking lot and you lock your doors at night before you go to bed, you're locking your doors because you don't want the people we're complaining cops have to deal with every day.
Right. You don't want them in your space.
Right. So to turn around and say, well, we just need to get a social work, you haven't put 3 seconds of thought into what that actually means. You either have no freaking idea or you're just outright lying trying to get a sound bite that'll get you a vote. That's all that is.
Yeah, it's getting the people on their side to try to go along with it um to make votes because, cop bad. Social workers are good, cop bad.
And let me jump in there. I'm not downing social workers.
I'm not either. There's a time and a place for them.
And there's more than just the mental health. A lot of social workers are associated with child advocacy centers, which do the
Right.
forensic interviews for abused children. The amount of information that investigator can get by partnering with a social worker dealing with that victim and that victim's parent who brought them in and some of the other situations, is invaluable to that child abuse investigation.
Right.
Right.
They have the resources that officers don't have, and they can send people.
They bring a training and a knowledge base
Right.
that works very well in that situation.
I just don't think that they belong on a scene where the officer has to worry about them.
They don't belong on the vast majority of scenes.
Right. I don't agree with that, because
There is a place.
you're putting those social workers in a situation that they're not trained to be in, and that makes the situation probably worse. And then you have to think about the officer, the mental health officer or a regular officer that's there with them has to worry about the safety of that social worker instead of dealing with what's actually happening in front of him on that scene.
Yeah. So yeah,
they have a place, they have a time, but I don't buy into the bullshit Mondami was preaching about we're going to send social workers out to solve mental health problems with someone who's batshit crazy. Because all you're going to do is end up getting a lawsuit from that family.
And here's how disingenuous that argument is. Mamdani, AOC, Bernie Sanders, and any other of your very prominent liberal politicians,
the squad,
they're not guarded by social workers.
No.
Right? They're not, we're going to de-escalate anybody who may assault us. No, they're guarded by cops with guns.
Right? That are paid by the city.
Or whatever.
Or wherever they're at.
Yeah. So that argument, on its face, again, you haven't spent 3 seconds thinking about it.
I honestly had to laugh when he came out when he was campaigning about it, going, yeah, that's going to work.
Yeah, no. If you're old enough to remember in the news broadcast, now I've unfortunately never been able to make it to New York. It is one of my bucket list places to go in my life. I don't look at me that way. I want to go see a play on Broadway, damn it, and I want to stand next to the Statue of Liberty. But
I can't see you going to a musical, but okay.
I didn't say musical. I said play. Anyway, well, I don't know. I think they do a musical about Queen. That's different. That's legit. But anyway, I forgot the question.
You'd love to go to New York,
but those of us that are old enough to remember and seen the news broadcast, and you can look it up on your favorite social media site. Look up old news broadcasts of New York from the 70s and early 80s, right? Police were low paid, they were underfunded, they didn't have equipment, they weren't politically supported. You had crime running rampant. You know, if you grew up in the 90s to 2000s, you saw the MTV doing broadcasts from smack dab in the middle of New York, and you see the big windows and all the advertisements and the people walking around. Look at that same corner from the 1970s. It was all freaking porn theaters.
Yeah.
So there's examples of what happens when we as a society decide we do not want to support law enforcement. We know what happens. The Wild West was the Wild West and was dangerous because we didn't have the social order brought by law enforcement. Right?
Right.
The golden age of piracy, they were able to exist because there was no government sitting down and saying, these are the rules and there's punishment for it.
Right.
Right? So there's examples all through history, and none of it's good when we don't have the law and order established. The modern version of that is the modern police officer. Right? So these, and I mentioned them earlier, you know, the AOCs and Bernie Sanders and Mamdanis of the world. And there's a female out in Portland who's a avowed socialist, which that's a different tangent. Who's saying we need to defund the police, which is funny because their socialist past is very authoritarian, but they're all saying we could cure society's ills with social workers.
Or getting rid of jails.
Yeah. So, no, that doesn't work. We've got plenty of examples in history where it doesn't work. when society when law enforcement, we as a government abandon an area. Look at the Chaz Chop Zone in Portland. Look at New Orleans for a couple weeks after Katrina. Um, and you're seeing other examples. Look at what happens when there is no law and order, right? It is literally the law of the jungle. The strongest person who's most willing to use violence for the least amount of provocation is the one in control.
Well, you
Period.
see that in New York because you see a lot of these stores closing because they set forth the law of anything under $1,000 that is theft, you don't go to jail.
And it's not just New York. You're seeing that
Yeah,
in
I
Washington
mean, there's
State and
everywhere.
California.
But they were locking up toothpaste
Yeah.
because people were going in and wrecking and grabbing because there wasn't a presence of law enforcement. Law enforcement's hands were tied because, oh no, it's under $1,000. We're not going to arrest them. Just like, and getting off on a tangent, I don't agree with cashless bail. That's for another subject. But getting back to deadly force, if it's so bad, then should we take away the guns from the officers?
Well, the people who make the argument we need social workers are in a roundabout way saying we need to take away guns. And they're kind of basing, and you heard us use taser. Taser's a name brand. It's like saying Coca-Cola. It can mean a brand or it could mean all soda. Taser's kind of the same way. It could mean a specific manufacturer, or it could mean any electro device that sends a shock. Um, I think as you see more and more of those come online and you see more and more law enforcement agencies getting sued, they're going to you're going to see that argument that an officer using a firearm or having a firearm all the time is not needed. I think you're going to see that argument ramp up. Um, and honestly, it's you on the surface you can understand their argument. Hey, if you've got this tool that allows you to incapacitate somebody without the deadly force that a firearm uses, I can see the basis of the argument, but it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. When you actually take it out of the theory and you put it into the real world, it makes no sense whatsoever, right? But you and I grew up in a world in which you didn't have to get felt up and walk through a metal detector to get on an airplane. Metal detectors were unheard of in high schools. Turds went to jail, period. None of these arguments happened. So now that we have all this other stuff going and we're feeling less and less safe as a society, even when the statistics are saying we have the lowest crime rate since 1900, um, I'm not real sure how taking a gun from the very people who are meant to keep that law and order, because remember what I said, bad things happen when you don't have law and order. All your little devices go away, all your utilities go away because nothing functions in chaos. All your comforts that you can't see living without goes away without police officers. I think it's disingenuous to say the very people that we're going to pay and empower to make sure we have a safe, secure society, which is what grants us all these little niceties, right? It's what, in an invert way, is why we have electricity, running water. We have, all these great devices and this great technology because we can function in a safe, secure society. If you take away the ability for a person to defend themselves, who's empowered to protect you, you're courting chaos. I think that's going to be the grandest lesson of unintended consequences ever.
Well, we had someone running here in Texas. He was a Democrat, Beto O'Rourke. wanted to get rid of firearms in the state of Texas, which that would never happen. I'm
Yeah,
just saying that would never
I'll
happen.
tell you why you're saying that.
And
We're so crazy in Texas, we paint guns on flags and
but
dare you to come take them.
but
It's part of our DNA.
if you take them away from law enforcement, you take away them from law-abiding citizens that go through the proper channels to get a firearm. The only ones left with firearms are the criminals.
Well, and you know,
So we're gonna say, please don't shoot me, Mr. Bad Guy, and he's gonna listen.
well, and you know, people are people. I don't care where you're at in the world, right? We all kind of want the basic same things. We may have some cultural differences, we may have some different religious differences and think a little bit differently. But at our core, people are all the same. So you can look at Canada and Australia and England. English speaking Western societies very similar to the US. All of them have enacted or have had gun control policies um, that don't allow the general civilian population, and in many cases, even their law enforcement doesn't carry. And you can see how effectively that works versus an armed society where a person being assaulted can defend themselves.
Right.
Right. And it depends on the courts to be able to come in after you have to defend yourself to reasonably evaluate, was the circumstance the same, right? If you're throwing those water bottles at somebody and finally, that person charges you to fight back and then you turn around and shoot them, well, that's not the story you're telling the cop when they show up, right? They just ran it, and I don't know why. It takes a court after that self defense scenario to reasonably look at what were the circumstances around it. And keep in mind, certainly here in Texas, and I would imagine every other state has some version of this. If anybody does something that kills another one, and most of the time it's a firearm used in self defense, by law, it has to at least go to a grand jury, which is people from the community looking, presented by the DA, looking at the circumstance side. Is there enough to go to court? And even just them saying, yeah, it needs to go to court doesn't mean that person's guilty. It means we need a more deeper evaluation of that situation. And I firmly stand by that. Even though you'll rarely hear me use the word attorney without the word jackass attached to it. I still fully support the court's views that they should evaluate when defense is done. We can't afford and we can't employ enough cops to be on every square foot to make sure nothing bad happens ever. So if you're going to take it away from society and you're going to take what started this conversation, take it away from cops, you're just courting a whole lot of bad consequences. And we have other societies, other countries that we can look at and say, see, this is what happens. And I think it's just arrogance to say, well, just because they did it and did badly, we're going to do it better. It's the refrain of every freaking socialist out there that we've mentioned those politicians. Just because it's failed everywhere else, we'll do it better.
And they've proven it won't be better. And almost anything that they've touched, like free rent and all the other things that these libs are doing right now, it. I'm with you. I agree 100%. All it would do is cause chaos.
Of course, you agree with
There would
me.
be unlawful order throughout the United States.
I'm always right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's funny, and it's a little off topic from what we're talking about guns, but it still comes into the socialists we mentioned a few minutes ago. Every socialist society that has ever existed has had to have a police force to maintain control over the population. So the very same idiots that are screaming we want socialism in the US today and are the same ones screaming cops shouldn't have guns and we probably shouldn't have cops, we should just have social workers. Yeah, they're going to be if history is any example, they're going to be the idiots screaming we need armed personnel. We're just not going to call them cops. We're going to have armed social workers to protect us, to maintain order. Again, unintended consequences that requires just a little longer than 3 seconds of thought.
What's that saying? Once you get on the horse, is stupid.
Oh yeah, I don't remember who we heard that from. They got on the stupid horse and went for a ride. And if you're the one that first said that, God bless you. I stole it from you. I admit it. It is one of the most brilliant things, and I'm giving you full credit. I just can't remember your name.
Well, I think to wrap up, and we want to hear from you, the viewers, is I want to hear both sides. I mean, if you're liberal, Republican, socialist, whatever,
She could be wrong. I won't.
I could
She could be wrong.
I could be completely wrong. But we want to hear your thoughts on if these politicians are calling for officers to de-escalate situations, especially and we've talked about the riots. I don't call them peaceful protests. I refuse. When you're literally setting dumpsters on fire and throwing shit at cops, that is not a peaceful protest.
Setting off Class C explosives.
Exactly. Let us hear from you and what you think, your views on this. We will respond. And I think that wraps it up for this episode, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Bye.